The laughter echoed off my kitchen tiles, sharp and cold, like knives clinking in a sink. My son's wife leaned back, wine glass tilted, her smile full of pity, dressed as humor. "You can't even cook without help," she said. And Daniel, my own flesh and blood, laughed with her. I smiled too, steady as I stirred the soup, because I'd already decided this would be the last meal I'd ever make for them. They didn't notice the silence beneath my smile. They never do. People like them mistake quiet for weakness. I'm 63 years old. I taught English for 35 of those years. Children who came to me with stutters, with fears, with dreams too fragile to name. I built a life around patience. I believed in nurturing things that took time. And maybe that's why betrayal lands heavier when you've given so much of yourself to the people who now treat you like a burden. This kitchen has seen everything. The first time Daniel walked, the last time my husband yelled, the years in between when I learned how to fill the air with kindness so no one would hear the crack forming underneath. Every roast, every stew, they were peace offerings, attempts to keep my family whole. Kira never understood that kind of giving. She came into this house with her manicured nails and thin voice that could slice through any room. At first, I tried to love her like a daughter. Now I see I was just feeding another mouth that would one day bite the hand that fed it. When she laughed tonight, Daniel didn't flinch. He just looked embarrassed, not for her cruelty, but for me. "Mum," he said lightly, "you know it's true. You can't manage the kitchen alone anymore." I looked at him then, really looked. The little boy who once cried when he burned his fingers on a hot pan was gone. In his place sat a man who found comfort in siding with strength, even when that strength was hollow and mean. I felt something twist inside me, not rage, something colder. Understanding, maybe. The kind that doesn't shout or weep. The kind that watches and learns. So I kept serving. I passed the bread. I laughed when they did. I cleared the plates. Every movement was practiced, deliberate, rehearsed through decades of motherhood. But as I stood at the sink, hands in warm, soapy water, I realized I wasn't washing dishes. I was washing away the last traces of illusion. Behind me, their laughter carried on. Brittle, self-satisfied. They didn't know I'd stopped listening. My thoughts were already elsewhere, wandering through memories of all the dinners that came before this one. Birthday candles, school achievements, hospital visits. Every milestone I had been there, feeding, soothing, holding everything together. And now, here they were, in my house, eating my food, mocking the hands that made it. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the window, a woman's face lined not just with age, but with history. I saw every year I gave, every apology I made to keep the peace. I thought of my mother, too, the way she once whispered, "They stop seeing you when you stop being useful." Maybe she was right. But tonight, something inside me shifted. I wasn't invisible. I was underestimated. And that, I realized, could be useful. I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands, and looked back at them. My son and his wife, laughing over the wine I paid for, in the house I built brick by brick, with overtime pay and aching feet. They thought I'd sit there forever, smiling through the small humiliations. They thought I was finished, but I was only just beginning to remember who I used to be and what I still had the power to do. When the dishes were done and the laughter finally left with them, the house fell into that thick, knowing quiet only old homes can hold. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing circles in the crumbs, and thought about how easily love turns into labor when no one's looking. I used to think sacrifice was the same thing as devotion, that giving without asking was how you proved love. Now I see it's how people learn what they can take. I wasn't born soft. Life carved that into me. I grew up in a 2-room house with a mother who worked herself into the ground and a father who drank his paycheck before the weekend. She taught me how to stretch food, how to hide money in the lining of coats, how to smile when men belittled you, because anger was dangerous and silence was safe. I thought I'd escaped that fate. I married a man with steady hands and a confident voice. For a while, he was gentle. Then the years wore on him. The world didn't give him the life he thought he deserved, so he took the difference out on me. Not with fists, but with words that stuck. "You wouldn't last a week without me," he'd say. "You need me to think for you." He died 6 years ago, leaving debts I didn't know existed. I spent months crawling through bank statements, pawn slips, unpaid bills, each one another layer of the life he'd kept from me. I paid them off, one by one, slowly, quietly, alone. I never told Daniel. I wanted him to remember his father as strong. I didn't want him to see the rot beneath the surface. Maybe that was my mistake, hiding the truth until it bred the same kind of man. Daniel grew up watching me forgive. Every time his father insulted me, I turned it into a lesson about patience. Every time he disrespected me, I told Daniel, "Your father's just tired. Be kind." What I didn't realize was that I was teaching him something else, that kindness meant endurance, that a woman's strength was in her silence. So now, when Kira laughs at me, he doesn't see cruelty. He sees familiarity. He sees what I trained him to see. A woman absorbing pain without protest. The ache of that realization sits heavier than any insult. It's not just betrayal, it's inheritance. I walk through the living room, every photograph a ghost of a time when I thought love was enough. Daniel's graduation, his wedding, my husband's arm draped around my shoulder like ownership. In each picture, I'm smiling, but my eyes are tired. I didn't notice it then. Now I can't look away. I sink into the armchair by the window and pull the old quilt over my knees, the one my mother sewed from scraps of her dresses, from years when fabric was expensive and every piece mattered. I run my fingers over the seams, over the tiny imperfections, and think about how women like her, like me, are stitched together by endurance. But seams can fray. I remember the day Daniel told me I should let Kira handle the finances. He said it like a kindness, a favor. I agreed, because I wanted to keep the peace. Peace, that word again. It's the polite mask women wear when the world expects them to disappear gracefully. The truth is, I was tired long before tonight. Not just from age, but from being the one who keeps pretending things are fine. Every sigh swallowed, every argument avoided. They collect somewhere inside you until one day they start to echo. That echo filled the house tonight. In every laugh, in every smirk, I heard my own mistakes played back to me. All the times I chose quiet over confrontation. All the times I let someone else define what I was worth. And yet, under the shame, something else stirs. Not rage, not revenge. Something steadier, like the beginning of resolve. Because if pain can be inherited, maybe power can be too. Maybe it's time to teach a new lesson, one they won't forget. I fold the quilt, set it aside, and stand. The kitchen still smells like rosemary and bitterness. My knees ache as I move, but I don't mind the pain. It reminds me I'm still here, still capable, still dangerous, if I choose to be. Upstairs, I open the old cedar chest I haven't touched in years. Inside, papers, folders, a few envelopes with my name on them. My husband's will, the deeds, the account numbers he thought I never found. I run my hand over the documents, the dust rising like breath from a sleeping animal. For the first time in a long while, I smile. Not the kind that hides, but the kind that plans. Tomorrow, I'll confront them, not as a mother seeking kindness, but as a woman reclaiming her worth. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. I made coffee, black, bitter, and sat in the same chair Daniel used to climb into when he was 5, his feet too short to touch the floor. I remember he'd wrap his arms around my neck and say, You're my best friend, Mama. I try to picture that boy now, but the man has swallowed him whole. By the time they arrived, the sun had just started breaking through the curtains. Kira's voice carried down the hallway before I even saw her. "She's up early," she said, and there was laughter in it, like waking in your own home was a performance for their amusement. Daniel followed her in, phone in hand, half listening as always. "Morning, Mum," he said, without looking up. "We were thinking, maybe it's time you moved somewhere smaller, easier to maintain." Kira found a beautiful assisted living place near the park. The words hung in the air, heavy as wet laundry. "Assisted living?" I repeated, slowly, letting the syllables sink. "You mean a home?" Kira smiled, that perfect, polite smile of someone already planning the obituary of your independence. "You'd love it. No stress, no chores. They handle everything. You deserve a break." She said it like mercy. It sounded like exile. Daniel sat down across from me, that earnest look he wears when he's about to say something cruel and call it love. "Mum, we've been talking. It's just not safe for you to live alone anymore." I looked around. The floor I scrubbed last night gleamed. The stove shone. The plants I'd kept alive longer than my marriage stood green and proud by the window. "Unsafe?" I asked. "Or inconvenient?" Kira's smile thinned. "Daniel's just worried, that's all." "No," I said, turning to him. "You're worried. She's interested." He blinked, caught off guard. I could almost see the boy he used to be, flickering behind his eyes, then gone, replaced by a man measuring how much he could get away with. "You don't have to be defensive, Mum," he said softly. "We're trying to help." I let the silence stretch. Then, carefully, I opened the folder I'd brought to the table, the one from the cedar chest upstairs, the one they thought I'd forgotten. His eyes flicked down at it, and something changed in his posture. "You remember these?" I asked, sliding the papers toward him. "Power of attorney? Joint account? All those forms you were so eager for me to sign?" He swallowed. "Of course. They're just practicalities." "Practicalities?" I repeated. "That's what your father used to call his secrets too." Kira shifted, her hand finding Daniel's under the table. A small move, but I caught it. The way she tried to steady him, as if the room had tilted. I leaned forward. "Do you know what I did last night?" Daniel hesitated. "You made dinner?" "I read," I said. "Every page, every signature, every clause. You've both been busy." The color drained from Kira's face. She tried to speak, but I didn't give her the space. "I found the transfer records, the withdrawals, the way you set up the management account in both our names, except the funds only go one way." Daniel pushed his chair back too fast. "Mum, it's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The calmness frightened them more than any shout could. "You think because I'm old, I don't look, that I don't understand, that I've shrunk into the background, too grateful to question you." Kira's mask cracked first. "You were supposed to trust us," she hissed. "I did," I said quietly. "That's how thieves always start, with trust." The room went still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's jaw clenched. "You're overreacting. You've always been emotional. We were trying to protect your finances from me," I interrupted. "From the woman who taught you how to sign your own name, Daniel." He flinched, just slightly. But I saw it. I stood then, slow and deliberate. My knees ached, but I didn't let it show. "You've taken enough from me. My peace, my money, my faith. You won't take my dignity too." Kira looked at Daniel, waiting for him to take charge. He didn't. For the first time, he looked small. I walked to the window, sunlight spilling across the table like a spotlight on the wreckage between us. "You'll both leave now," I said. "I'll be in touch soon." Through a lawyer. Kira's breath hitched. "A lawyer?" "Yes." I turned to face them. "The kind who knows how to fix signatures that never should have been signed." They didn't argue. They gathered their things in silence, Kira's heels clicking across the tile like the last notes of a bad song. When the door shut, the house exhaled. For a long moment, I stood there, listening to my heartbeat, to the echo of all the times I'd stayed quiet. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee. The first sip tasted like something new. Not peace exactly. Something sharper. Something alive. That night, the house felt different. Lighter, somehow. But restless, too. Like the air before a storm. I sat by the window with the folder still open beside me, the papers spread out like bones waiting to be read. The edges were soft from years of neglect, but the truth inside them was sharp enough to cut. I thought I'd found everything earlier. The stolen transfers, the quiet theft dressed up as caretaking. But as I looked again, I noticed something odd. One of the documents, an old property statement, listed a signature that wasn't mine. My handwriting has always been neat, rounded. This one was tight, angular, impatient. Daniel's. I held the page closer, the letters swimming in the dim light. He'd forged me. My son, my own child, had written my name with his hand and used it to empty what I'd spent a lifetime building. A numbness crept through me. Not shock, exactly. Something colder. The kind of stillness that comes when you realize you've crossed a line you didn't know existed. There's no going back from this. Not for him. Not for me. I walked to the old desk in the living room. The one Richard used to keep locked. The one I'd never touched out of habit, not fear. I still had the key. It sat in the blue teacup by the lamp, exactly where he used to leave it. Inside the drawer were the last fragments of his secret life. Insurance letters, bank slips, and a folder labelled contingency. I opened it, expecting numbers. Instead, I found names, lawyers, contacts, even an old business partner I'd never heard of. Buried in the back, one document stood out. A trust agreement filed 2 years before Richard's death. It transferred all marital assets to the surviving spouse and designated trustee. That trustee was Daniel. So Richard had started it. The same man who once said, "You'll never have to worry. I'll take care of everything." He had, by leaving the wolf in charge of the gate. It hit me then how deep this rot ran. My husband's deceit hadn't died with him. It had raised my son. It had whispered in his ear that control was love, that ownership was responsibility. He didn't become cruel on his own. He inherited it, the same way I inherited silence. I sat back, staring at the papers spread across my lap. Every generation builds a cage and calls it care. I could have wept, but tears would have been too small for what I felt. Instead, a kind of grim clarity settled in. There was no misunderstanding here. No mistake. They hadn't stumbled into betrayal. They'd planned it. Carefully, efficiently, as if I were a problem to be managed. My hands trembled, but my thoughts didn't. I started making notes, names, dates, account numbers. Every transaction, every signature, every time they'd come by under the guise of helping. By midnight, the table was covered in paper and evidence. I worked methodically, like I was grading essays again, except this time the lesson was survival. At one point, I found a letter addressed to Daniel from a law firm, dated just last month. The words were plain, cold. Regarding the sale of 214 Greystone Avenue, transfer pending owner consent. Greystone, my parents' house, the one I inherited, the one my mother begged me never to sell. They were selling it behind my back, using my forged signature. Something in me broke open then, not with noise, but with certainty. There was no space left for pleading or forgiveness. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about erasure. The slow, deliberate erasure of everything I'd built, every trace of who I'd been before them. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the moon sitting low over the yard. The same yard where Daniel once built forts out of cardboard boxes and called them castles. I used to bring him lemonade and watch him play, thinking I was raising a kind man. Now I saw the truth. I'd raised a man who thought castles were built by taking what wasn't his. The night stretched long. I didn't sleep. Instead, I went to the attic and opened the chest where I kept the things that had outlived usefulness: old ledgers, lesson plans, my teaching certificates. Among them, a leather-bound notebook. Opened it and began to write, not out of sentiment, but precision, a record of betrayal, every step laid bare. By dawn, I knew what I had to do, not just to stop them, but to make them feel what they'd taught me, that the quiet ones are the most dangerous when they finally start to speak. I poured coffee, watched the first light seep into the kitchen, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't forgiveness, it was focus. The plan would need care, timing, documentation, all the things I'd spent a lifetime mastering. I would make this right. Not loudly, not violently, just completely. When I closed the notebook, I whispered a promise into the quiet house. They built this lie together. I'll bury it the same way. Morning came like a reckoning. Soft light cutting through the blinds, touching everything that had once belonged to us. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, the same kitchen where they'd laughed at me, and started making a list. Not of groceries or chores, but of steps, facts, allies, moves. It felt almost mechanical, but clean, like sweeping glass into neat piles after an accident. The first call I made was to Evelyn. We'd taught together for 20 years before she retired. I hadn't spoken to her in a while. Life gets busy, even when you're no longer living it for yourself. Evelyn had always been sharper than she let on. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp or pity me. She just said, "Bring everything. I'll make coffee." I drove to her house with the folder and the forged papers, my heart steady. Evelyn had married a lawyer once, briefly, disastrously, but she still knew enough to read a document like a bloodhound. She spread the pages across her dining table and slipped on her glasses. After half an hour, she looked up. "He's signed your name on at least 3 legally binding documents. That's fraud, Mary. You could press charges." I nodded. "I know. But you won't," she said, studying me. "Not yet. No, not yet. I wanted justice, not chaos. Revenge, when rushed, loses its precision. And I'd spent a lifetime being careful. Evelyn helped me copy everything. She told me which lawyer to see, one who dealt with elder financial abuse, a phrase that stung like salt when she said it aloud. Elder abuse. I was the woman who'd raised a child, worked 2 jobs, paid every debt, and now I was a case file in someone's folder. But labels didn't bother me anymore. Names were just tools. I could use this one. That evening, I went to the lawyer, a quiet man named Patel, younger than Daniel, but with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He listened as I explained, never interrupting. When I handed him the forged signature, he nodded once. "We can act on this," he said. "Quietly, if you prefer." "I prefer quietly," I told him. "Loud doesn't last." We built a plan. Freeze the joint account, file a report under seal, notify the bank of fraudulent authorization, and prepare the papers to revoke Daniel's access to everything: the house, the pension, the trust. Patel said it would take a week, maybe 2. I told him to take 3. Precision mattered more than speed. That night, I drove home under a sky thick with clouds. I thought of Richard, the man who'd started this chain of betrayal, and wondered if he'd ever felt small, if he'd ever looked around at his own lies and realized they'd become too large to control. Probably not. Men like him mistake control for security until both are gone. I reached home, turned off every light but one, and began to cook. Not because I was hungry, but because it helped me think. The rhythm of chopping, the hiss of oil, the slow thickening of sauce, all of it felt like meditation, a rehearsal. This was how I'd take my life back, through patience, through small, deliberate acts. In the days that followed, I played the part they expected. I answered Daniel's calls with warmth, even laughed when Kira invited herself over to help with bills. I let them think I was retreating into confusion. It's easy to weaponize their arrogance. When Daniel asked if I'd considered the assisted living home, I smiled and said, maybe, after one last family dinner. He agreed too quickly. Kira even offered to bring wine. They were confident again, the way people get before a fall. While they prepared for that dinner, I met twice more with Patel. Together, we assembled every piece of evidence into a single, elegant trap. On the day before the dinner, he handed me an envelope, thick, official, and heavy with consequence. Once they sign these acknowledgements, it's over, he said. They won't even know what they're signing, I replied. He smiled faintly. You remind me of my grandmother. She used to say revenge is just delayed clarity. I drove home with the envelope beside me on the passenger seat, like an old friend. That night, I laid the table. My mother's china, the crystal glasses I never used, the linen napkins I'd ironed the day Richard proposed. Every piece had history. And now, every piece would witness its closure. I cooked the meal slowly, deliberately. The same roast chicken Kira mocked, the same rosemary, the same scent that filled the house the night I first saw their cruelty. Except this time, the knife in my hand wasn't for carving. It was for cutting clean through the illusion that they still owned me. As the chicken browned, I looked around the kitchen one last time. Everything was exactly as they expected. The quiet, tired woman who couldn't even preheat her own oven. Perfect camouflage. When I finally turned off the stove, the clock read 6:17. In less than 24 hours, they'd sit here again, certain they were in control. And that's when I'd serve them the meal they'd earned, one plated in silence, garnished with justice. By the time the doorbell rang, the house smelled of rosemary, lemon, and something else. Anticipation. The table gleamed beneath the chandelier, every glass filled just enough to catch the light. It looked like a celebration. It was, in a way. I'd dressed deliberately. A soft blue dress, simple but precise. My mother's pearls, not out of sentiment, but ceremony. I wanted them to see what they were losing before it slipped from their hands. Kira was first through the door, perfume thick, smile tighter than usual. She carried wine, the same bottle she'd bragged about buying for special occasions. Daniel followed, phone in hand, thumb scrolling even as he said hello. Smells amazing, Mom, he said, tone all surface. Did you have help? I smiled. Just my own two hands. We sat. They ate. They laughed. I watched. The chicken was perfect. Crisp skin, tender meat. Kira went back for seconds. Daniel wiped his plate with bread like a man without manners. I refilled their glasses, not too much. Enough to make them comfortable. As they talked, I saw it clearly. Their ease, their confidence. They believed they'd already won. They spoke of vacations, renovations, plans. All funded, of course, by what they thought was theirs. When Daniel reached for more wine, I placed the bottle down gently and said, Before dessert, there's something we need to do. He looked up, mildly irritated. Mom, can it wait? No, I said, with a steadiness that quieted the room. It can't. I slid 2 envelopes across the table, heavy paper, neatly sealed. Just something for you both to sign, I said lightly. A few housekeeping things before I finalized some bank updates. Kira reached first, her curiosity a reflex she couldn't hide. What's this? Consent forms, I said. To transfer management. Simplify everything, the way you always suggested. Daniel's chest lifted, a small, smug breath. That's smart, Mum. He uncapped his pen and signed without reading. Kira followed. She always followed. I waited until the ink dried, then slid the papers back into my folder, slow and deliberate. Thank you, I said softly. That makes things much easier. Kira smiled, wine bright. See, Daniel? She's finally letting us help. I nodded. Yes. Though I suspect you'll find my definition of help a little different from yours. Her smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? I met her eyes. It means that what you just signed wasn't transfer consent. It was acknowledgement. A statement of fraudulent activity, forged authorization, and unlawful access to protected assets. Legal documentation. Prepared and witnessed. The silence that followed was almost holy. Daniel froze, the color draining from his face. What are you talking about? You forged my name, I said quietly. You stole my savings. You tried to sell my mother's house. You've both lied to me for months. But tonight, you've confessed. In writing. Kira's fork clattered against her plate. You tricked us. Yes, I said. I did. The room seemed to shrink around them. Daniel's voice cracked, somewhere between anger and fear. You can't do this. You're my mother. I leaned forward. You stopped being my son when you started seeing me as a wallet with wrinkles. Kira's breathing quickened. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said. The lawyer already has copies. The bank accounts are frozen. The property sale has been cancelled. Tomorrow, you'll receive notice of the charges and asset reversals. And if you're smart, you'll stay silent and stay away. Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. You don't mean this. I do, I said. Every word. He looked at me like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. And maybe I had. Maybe I'd finally returned to the version of myself that existed before I'd let everyone else define me. Kira was crying now, her voice brittle. You'll ruin us. I almost laughed. No, Kira. You ruined yourselves the moment you mistook kindness for weakness. I stood. My knees ached, but my back was straight. Dinner's over. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. He looked around the room like it might offer him escape. Then, slowly, he put his napkin down, eyes dull with disbelief. As they left, Kira whispered, You'll die alone, you know. I paused at the doorway, watching their silhouettes fade into the night. No, I said. I'll live alone. That's the difference. When the door closed, the silence felt clean, like something freshly laundered. I walked back to the table, gathered the empty plates, and placed them gently in the sink. The same hands that once served them were now washing away the last traces of their presence. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. Just relief. A bone-deep calm that hummed in my chest. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, and final. I poured myself a small glass of wine, sat where Daniel had sat, and looked at the papers resting neatly in the folder. It was done. They had laughed at me once, mocked the hands that fed them, the woman who made their lives soft. Tonight, those same hands had written their undoing, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt mine. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen like a quiet witness. The house smelled of last night's roast, faint rosemary, faint smoke, something ending. I made tea instead of coffee. Coffee had always been their thing. Tea was mine. I sat at the table and listened to the silence. No laughter, no footsteps, just the hum of the fridge and the soft clink of my cup against the saucer. It felt strange at first. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It had shape. It had peace. The phone started ringing around noon. Daniel's number, then Kira's, then an unknown one. I let them all ring out. Justice doesn't need conversation. It just needs stillness. When I finally checked my voicemail, Daniel's voice cracked between anger and pleading. Mum, we can fix this. You didn't have to go this far. Kira's came after, sharp and brittle. You've destroyed us. I deleted them both. You can't destroy what was already hollow. That night, I slept through until morning. No dreams, no ghosts. Just rest. The kind that feels earned. A few days later, Patel called. Everything's official, he said. The accounts are secured, the house is protected, and the investigation's open. You don't need to speak to them anymore. Good, I said. Silence suits me. He hesitated. You sound different. I feel different. After we hung up, I stood by the window and looked out at the garden, the same one Daniel once helped me plant when he was 10. I'd thought I was teaching him about roots. Now I know I was teaching him how deep they can rot if you don't tend them. Later that week, I saw him, outside the grocery store of all places, his face thinner, eyes ringed, phone glued to his hand. He looked up and froze when he saw me. "Mum?" he said, voice cracking. "Please. You didn't have to." "I did," I said quietly. "And you needed me to." He looked at me like he was seeing someone else entirely. Maybe he was. The version of me that endured everything he and his father took had finally gone. "You've changed," he said. "No," I said. "You just never looked close enough." I left him standing there between shopping carts and the noise of the world he used to control. Days turned into weeks. My life began to take on its own rhythm again. Mornings with tea, walks at dusk, the slow, steady hum of a house that finally felt like it belonged to me. One afternoon, I drove to Greystone Avenue, my mother's old house, the one they tried to sell out from under me. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, but it stood, stubborn, proud, like her. I ran my hand along the rail, the same place she used to rest her arm when she watched the neighbors walk by. "It's safe now," I whispered, and it felt like a prayer answered late, but still in time. Back home, I started clearing out what no longer belonged. Richard's trophies, his tools, the suits that still smelled faintly of stale smoke. I boxed them all. The clerk at the donation center asked, "Are you sure you want to give these up?" "Yes," I said. "They've taken up enough space." That night, Evelyn came over with lemon pie. We sat by the window, eating slowly, like women who'd seen the worst and chosen not to stay there. "You know," she said, "most people your age would have folded." "I did," I said, "for 40 years. Then I unfolded." She laughed, that full, throaty laugh that fills a room. "That line belongs in a book." I smiled. "Maybe it belongs in a life." Since then, the days have blurred together in the softest way. I don't count them anymore. I just live them. I've started journaling again. Small things. The smell of rain. The color of light at 5 p.m. The sound of my own laughter returning. Sometimes I write about my mother. Sometimes about the girl I used to be before I learned to apologize for existing. And sometimes, when I sit in this kitchen, I catch my reflection in the window and barely recognize her. Not because she's older, but because she's finally at peace. Kira sent me a letter last week. Only one line. "I hope you're happy." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into the trash. Happiness isn't what I wanted. It's too light, too brief. What I have now is heavier. Contentment with edges. Freedom that costs something, so I know it's real. I've learned that justice doesn't roar. It doesn't come wrapped in applause or apology. It whispers. It settles. It takes its time. And then one day you wake up and realize your heart doesn't flinch anymore. I walk through this house now, the same one they tried to take, and touch the walls, the counters, the banister. Each one holds a memory, but none of them hurt anymore. They're just mine. Sometimes I think of my mother again, how she lived her life shrinking herself for peace, mistaking silence for safety. I broke that chain. The women who come after me won't inherit my endurance. They'll inherit my strength. Evelyn says I should write it all down, publish it even. I told her it's enough that it's written in me. Some stories don't need to be told aloud. They just need to stop being secrets. Tonight, I cooked again. Roast chicken. The same dish they mocked me for. The same scent filling the kitchen. Except this time it isn't a reminder of humiliation. It's reclamation. I set the table for one, poured a small glass of wine, and whispered a quiet toast to the woman who finally stopped mistaking survival for weakness. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. No audience. No mockery. Just warmth. steady, and private. When the meal was done, I cleared the table, wiped the counter, and stood still for a moment, hands resting on the cool edge of the sink. The house was silent again, not empty, just peaceful. Outside, night settled in. I caught my reflection in the window. Older, yes, but steady, unbroken. And I thought, this is what freedom really sounds like. Not forgiveness, not applause, just silence. The good kind, the earned kind. I turned off the light, the last glow of the kitchen fading behind me, and said it softly to the dark. Not for anyone else to hear, just for myself. I cooked for them one last time, not out of love, but out of habit. And when I cleared the plates, I cleared my life. Then I closed the door on everything that wasn't mine anymore, and the silence, at last, felt full.